Welcome to what may be round 4 or 5 or of Wake Up and Think Clearly for today, Saturday, August 7, 2021. It is currently 9:47 a.m. in the United States Eastern Daylight Savings Time Zone. Joining us are Mike on a bike somewhere in Florida, Jairo Jamyang Pawo, which means peace warrior, I believe, in Tibetan, and myself, Rami, from Central Florida Philosophy Meetup, the assistant organizer recording this session. Previously, we were speaking with Dominic, and he was asking, well, actually getting quite defensive about a question that I'd asked him earlier, and I don't feel it is right to speak with him on that matter unless he's present. So let's open up to any thoughts that anyone else might be having.
Hey, Rami, I'll just share just a little bit when it comes to these discussions and maybe conclusions that are being drawn from study and experience and whatever. And I feel like there should be a so what or a goal in mind that helps maybe scrutinize the conclusions that we draw. Knowing certain things ultimately should result in some kind of a so what, or why does it matter, or how does it matter type conclusions. So in the discussions, I'm listening, and hopefully Dominique will come in, because my main question would be, as an agitator, to what end would he be pursuing in that role? I mean, like, to me, I think there is value in it, because it keeps people, honest, and it scrutinizes, things very heavily. But I think that we need to land somewhere. And so to me, the discussion, to me, this is a bit of an iron sharpening iron type scenario where, things that don't need to, be a part of who we are get, knocked off, and you just end up with something that endures. And but I just wonder, as we talk, if we shouldn't have, never lose the focus on, what's the so what in all this discussion.
Yeah, excellent. Let's have a point or an end, and let's not forget that we're trying to not only build or refine each other's understandings, but each week it's kind of nice to know that you're going to come in and that you're going to get somewhere. Like, if there's a central theme, is that what I'm hearing?
So, I tend to be real simple in my beliefs, and to me, you probably know that I'm a Christian, or I consider myself Christian, and to me, my idea of God, the undefinable, beyond our comprehension God, is most fully defined through a universal word, or a very broad word of love, in the purest sense. And then what I boil it down to further than that is that, love is the highest form of relationship. And so to me, as God's people, he wants us to be in relationship with him and relationship with each other in the most perfect way. And so, the so what to me is, how do we orient ourselves towards perfect relationship, and that's the so what. And so sometimes critical views and can be very beneficial towards relationship, but we should never lose sight of the goal of
Yeah.
relationship. And I don't know if there's other end games in mind. To me, that's just, keeping it very simple. To me, that is the goal, is perfect relationship. And I don't know if there's other goals that people would have. Like, for example, a lot of the concerns that I have when I hear about some other philosophies is, how to isolate yourself and how to, embrace nothingness, or
Right.
Yeah, and so it's just, to me, I really would, I guess what I'm curious to know is there something more compelling than relationship that some of these philosophies are based on? Again, going back to my belief system, I believe that there is an enemy of God who would seek to cause people to want to go into isolation. And so it's subtle, it's very crafty, and by some I wouldn't even say strange phenomena, but some people dive headlong into that isolation, self centeredness, when the ultimate is relational, which is other centeredness. And you just benefit as a result of yielding or
Yes.
So anyway, that's kind of, as I do more listening than anything else, because I freely admit that I really have never studied anything outside of my faith. So what I do is I come into this with the willingness to scrutinize my faith, to find out if there's something that I maybe am not giving proper weight to that would cause me to see things differently. And as honest of a broker as I can be on that, I haven't found anything but detriment when I've heard of other philosophies. And I look forward to, maybe hearing something that is compelling, just to is a sanity check for, where.
And listening is a beautiful service.
But yeah, so for example, I wish Rami would get back on. I think that the value that he brings in the relationship here is that he questions everything, and he's a bit of a wrecking ball, and there's nothing wrong with the tearing down or the causing people to think. But I think that and this is pretty common in the philosophy realm from what I've seen, is tearing down is easy in a sense. It's building something up that stands the test of time, that has to be just right. Tearing down is if you don't eventually go towards something else, it's nothing but ushering in chaos, in my opinion. And order, proper order, is a very special and valuable thing. And that's just, I guess I'm just sharing the conversation of how I look at this, where I come into this with, and maybe I would like to challenge the group with those concepts to find out, okay, is there something else that people are valuing, or an end state that they're looking for, or a goal in mind that can be shared that maybe has more merit.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't think of anything that is more important than our relationship with our Creator.
And therefore relationship with one another as well, right?
Yes, the second greatest commandment. Also, we have to, in a way, there's so many, at least for myself, and by the way, I acknowledge that listening and picking up on people's cues, I'm kind of deaf to. It's not that I'm deaf, I'm functionally deaf, because I know I'm not the best listener, and I'm not the most patient people whenever I first see an error, because I know that if I don't address it and I just listen to them, that error is going to persist, and that really uh, that keeps me up at night, to be honest with you, in a way at times. And it's the accumulation of those things where, because if I've heard them and they're in my mind, and I know I have to counter them, then I'll want to either get back with the person, but I could certainly be a better listener, because I think you did in the later end have something there that was valid and true. But
The
anyway,
beauty in the fact that we all have our strengths and our limitations is how it necessitates a body of many parts.
Yes.
None of us are meant to be independent of one another. It's funny to hear you scrutinize yourself, because I wasn't picking up on any of that. I was just finding how helpful it was for you to be so well read and have such good recall of so many valuable pieces of information that are foundational to belief systems and cultures and history. So you bring that to the table, and it's the thing that allows the many parts is that humility to recognize our limits and to appreciate what anyone else would bring to the table, and the politeness within that exchange.
If I may, I'd like to share an insight that was the result of being at a conference and speaking with a few different people. I just came back from a 2-week vacation with my wife of the Midwest, where we toured Cincinnati, Ohio, and some really neat differing towns in northern Kentucky, Covington, and Lake Park. And then that was for about 2.5 days and 2 nights. Then 11 days in Naperville, Illinois, well, partial day in downtown Chicago, and everything in between. And the reason why we chose to spend most of our time in Naperville, Illinois, was because that's where the 40th annual, which was my wife and I's first attendance of the G.K. Chesterton conference. Chesterton was an influence on both C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. There's a person by the name of Dale Ahlquist who had I think for 7 or 8 seasons, a program on the EWTN television network, Eternal World Television Network, which is primarily Catholic. And Ahlquist started Baptist and then converted to Catholicism. But he created this program called G.K. Chesterton, the Apostle of Common Sense. And my goodness, these were some of the weirdest and most wonderful and intellectually stimulating and fully realized people that I have ever come across in my whole entire life. It was just marvelous. And they weren't all Catholics, because there was for instance, a Methodist minister from I think Alabama, from Mississippi, who joined, because they were all in one way or another fans of either Ahlquist's presentation of, or the direct readings of the works of G.K. Chesterton. You can go to chesterton.org to learn more about the man and of that society and of their schools network that they're building. So that if civilization falls down, already they've been training people in the classics so that it can be built right back up again. And it's if you want a really great thinker, read Chesterton, of the Christian faith. So what insight that came about was actually because Chesterton and the one who influenced him, Hillel Belloc, they had a sort of political philosophy called distributism, which is not socialism. What it was the idea that I think is, in a way, was exemplified here in the United States with our land grant system. Chesterton described it essentially as 3 acres and a cow, or the idea that, to put it more modern, at least up to the 1970s terms, the idea of equality of opportunity, not of outcome, but of opportunity, which is to say, the means to living and of life should be spread as equally as, or not as equally, but rather as far as possible. And even Thomas Jefferson thought that the way to ensure liberty was to make sure that land ownership throughout the nation was as widely, to the furthest extent possible, extended out to the small land holder, because that means that you can stand on your land and people aren't going to push you off of it. You can develop in a way that God would intend with you upon a piece of it, not spending all your time just paying rent to some lord, some earthly lord. So to me, I find, and a number of the people there were distributists. They're trying to rebrand it as localism and speak in terms of the economic benefits, combining it with the classic idea of Buy American, where you support your local communities, that you build up your local economies, that you don't go with big box, but you go with your local crafters and artisans and developers, and people are free in that way to exist within their various plots, and to make the most of life in a free way in that sort of environment. There was another system that came along, a system I thought by a fellow by the name of Henry George, who lived, I think, from 1836 to 1897. And when he died in 1897, he was the 3rd most known American in the United States, or from the United States in the world, actually, after Thomas Edison and Mark Twain. And that was due to his speeches, because he traveled the world. When he was a youth at 16, he grew up not in the Catholic faith, but in the Episcopal, and was going to be a minister. His father was a typesetter, but then he decided to go off instead and join a ship at, I think, 15 or 16. And so he signed on. He was I forget his role on the boat, but that ship traveled to Australia and to China and to India. So he got to see how land was managed in other parts of the world. And in 1871, he wrote a book called Our Land and Land Policy. And that came out of something that happened later, because after the shipping, he wound up in San Francisco, and he went into the newspaper business, and he wrote a very influential work, which was required reading in the California school system for a long time, called What the Railroad Will Bring Us. Because the way that the deal that the federal government had struck with the railroad entrepreneurs was that you lay down a track and we'll give you 10 miles on either side of the track, and that is your land. So it was a way for the railroads not to have to pay for the work, but to, in terms of cash, but it just paid them in terms of raw land, territorial title claim. And what that did was, because wherever entrepreneurs would lay the track, and then they could set up cities and they could charge rents, and they could own entire towns, entire plots of land. So a lot of Central California, and also across the nation, the railroads had all that land. And then any cities that came up, when you control the land, you control the people. And when you can set the terms of what will be grown, it's all sorts of power that becomes tied with that. So his response for how to break up land monopoly, or which would really be oligarchy, but the concentration of land, like Pareto observed back in I think 19th or 20th century Italy, because he found that the way the natural sort of works is that 80% of the land winds up being owned by essentially 20% of the people, and then it goes up in a sort of way where you have the fewest people having the greatest amount of land. And that seems to be just sort of a system that is enabled as a natural phenomenon by way of the processes, the techniques that I've given reference to, such as how do you get Egyptians to build pyramids? But so his solution in Henry George's 1879 work, Progress and Poverty, and it's got a long subtitle which describes the problem, and his solution to the problem. The problem being that the more that civilization builds up, the more that the people who actually do the building up have to pay for the privilege to live within the civilization. And then you also have these people who extract out their own private rents. So you wind up breaking humanity into these two classes, the landed and the unlanded, those paying rent to the landed, and the landed sit back and get to no matter how much rises, because he said, why is it when we have all this technological development, which you certainly had in the 19th century, you had global trade, you had steam as a dominating and driving technology, and all these inventions. How is it with all this technological progress, we continue to have poverty? And the reason why he discovered, of course, was going back to that idea of that the more civilization develops, those who hold title to the land, which in the United States is rather low to hold, you have a lot of land speculators which will pay a title fee, a monthly property tax. They won't develop it all. They'll let other people work and develop the areas around it. And then so they get to buy low, pay this annual monthly fee, which is relatively low, until others have built up the value of that plot of land, and then they get to sell high. And it's the best investment out there. Because that's functionally how he set up. He worked at the California Land Office in the titles department there in the state capital of California. And he stated, well, here's our solution, or here's the remedy to this problem of continuing or advancing poverty, because he saw that rents would always rise so that the effective wage after rent would be low compared to what was extracted by those who held title to the land. And he did try to abolish title law. He said, you don't even have to do that. Just take the public's revenue or government's means for drawing revenue out of labor. There wasn't even an income tax back then, and out of trade, and out of the production of durable capital goods, which a lot of this he's actually borrowing from Adam Smith, the author of the January 1776 work, the Wealth of Nations, which there's a subtitle to that, which is useful too. But the Smith identified the three means of production in the modern world, which are land, labor, and durable capital goods. The argument that Georgists, named after Henry George, or some have shortened into geoists, or the ancient term, because they wouldn't refer to it back then, they would refer to it as single tax, which was his solution, George's solution. He said, reduce all of government's revenue drawing from a single tax on the unimproved value of land, which is to say, not the structures on the land. It's not like your traditional property tax, or thankfully some states such as our own in Florida has, or at least in Orange County, we have split rate. So you're assessed and charged for your structure and assessed and charged for the land. Georgists would say, don't tax the structures at all. People can build their additions however much they like. Just the value of a particular plot within a particular location, which is primarily determined upon the attributes, the majority of amount is based upon the location of that plot. Because certainly in the argument from, at one point he was tied to the United Labor Party because they wanted to make him first mayor of New York City and then maybe even president. But that all fell apart because the socialists came in and invaded. But anyway, I know this is a lot. It's like baptism of knowledge by a fire hose, but
we can go back and listen to the recording on YouTube.
Yeah, and there's lots of resources out there. Georgism, Geoist, Geoist, and I've provided a bunch of resources on the Orlando Thinkers discussion board and in the past events that we've held here in Central Florida Philosophy Meetup, and also in the Orlando Thinkers discussion. and their video resources. Some interesting Georges throughout time have been William F. Buckley Jr. and Thomas Friedman. Is that no, not Thomas Friedman? Wrong guy. Friedman. Milton was his last name Friedman? The guy who did The Power of Choice, and Milton Friedman. So Milton Friedman thought it was the least bad tax, which was the argument, because if you tax labor, you reduce and de-incentivize labor. If you tax durable capital good production or their trade, you reduce durable capital goods. Adam Smith, the French physiocrats who were trying to advise the French monarchy before the French Revolution occurred, they were unsuccessful. The evils of the French Revolution spawned out. And Henry George and a number of others since then, like the Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, are all advocates of this idea of taxing the unimproved value of land, which in Adam Smith's day, he referred to as ground rents. So George's most radical statement in the 26th chapter of Progress and Poverty, because the first 26, or everything before that is talking about the conditions of 19th century labor. But then he talks about, which were really dreary, because you had all these people in tenements and, oh my goodness. Things are much better today, but his most radical statement, and this is why he's described as being an advocate from the radical center, is that we must make land common. And he said, you don't have to take anyone's titles away, but you just lay the government revenue on those land titles. So whatever value comes from people's collective actions to build up civilization, that should be the source of the public's revenue.
I have a question.
Yes.
What happens in case of a piece of land has so much value, has been determined, and then you drill and you find oil?
Right.
Does the value increase, and so the taxation increases?
Right. So there's a number of responses to that, but certainly that, so there are two ways two primary means by which to evaluate land. One is its location value, and the other is its inherent value. In other words, arable soil, which will produce higher numbers of crops per acre or hectare, is inherently more valuable than a sandy soil that unimproved will not produce on its own as much yield, as many bushels. And the same would be true in terms of a plot that has, if you can either, in your title, a title is a bundle of rights, and if that title includes whatever's underneath the ground, then that title is worth more than a title that just gives you rights to the surface of the ground. It may be something else or someone else that makes claim to the resources underneath it, be it uranium or petroleum or natural gas.
What if it's water? How do you deal with water?
Well, water certainly is
shared.
To me, wealth is clean water, clean air, arable soil, the ability to stand on the land and not be forced off of it. That is wealth, as far as I can tell.
What if in your little plot of land, there's other little plots of land around you, and they need water, and you drill the water, and then you charge, because you drill,
right? You
charge them for the water, and you got a monopoly on the water, but it's all
great question. So let me share his radical statement, because I didn't do a good job doing that. George's radical statement in the 26th chapter of Progress and Poverty, the 1879 work that probably made him the most famous economist of the world at the time, is that we must make land, which is to say natural resources, So land in the economic sense, we're talking about physicality. We must make land common. Now, how do you interpret that? I, as someone who's a studier of Christ and of the Abrahamic faiths, would say common is to say that it all belongs to God, and that our access to it is based upon God's good graces to grant us access to these things, so long as we're living in accordance with God's commands. That would be my response. I think there are other responses, because we don't live in a Christian nation. We live in the United States of America, which has a First Amendment and somehow recognizes, not somehow, I think it comes out of natural law theory, that all men are created equal, and as such have rights to, have inherent built-in rights, either from our humanity or through, in the original drafting of the Declaration of Independence, the first draft had stated divine right. Benjamin
Are you
Franklin-
reading it? Are you reading it off the ceiling?
No, I'm recalling it from my mind. Benjamin Franklin, who actually studied and was going to be a minister, but then went into publishing instead, and also postmastering. He thought that it would work better, like in a more universal sense, if you refer to it as inalienable. So we derive these inalienable rights that no other man or government can deprive you of, because, and it's pre-existing prior to any government. They're baked into our humanity. So in the classical liberal sense, there are three important rights: life, liberty, and property. And then it got swapped out for pursuit of happiness, because not everyone wants to own or be owned by property, I guess, is one political or polite way of or diplomatic way of going about describing that swap out from the classical liberal to the, and the classical liberals, by the way, they're not what liberals are, what that tag or word means today. The classical liberals sought to basically pull down or make low or to eliminate privilege. So an example of someone's writing, and that would be Albert J. Nock's Our Enemy the State. Albert J. Nock is dead-centered libertarian, and he would state that governments are founded and maintained for the establishment of order, whereas states are established and maintained for, or established and maintained for the purpose of privilege. What do we mean by that? In the case of a monarchy, it could be the Queen of England granting her lover the rights to all the taxes collected on the production of wine within her kingdom. That is a privilege. So in that classical liberal, not social liberal, which is more socialist and is about the achievement of equality of outcome, which is a disaster. Time and again, history has shown that. But classical liberal in terms of equality of opportunity, in other words, where some people have privileges over others. And the problem with privilege, or actually it's a deeper and wider problem, it's called the insider-outsider problem. With the insider-outsider problem, I'm going to give it to you from the small scale. I was required to read The Grapes of Wrath in high school. And in The Grapes of Wrath, in the final chapter, the daughter who's just lost her baby through a miscarriage, and there's a storm going through, and it's flooding out the camp of Okies and all these other refugees from the climate disaster that was the Dust Bowl. At the end, she describes, the people who have land versus the people who lost their land through poor land management practices. She describes, or I should say, whoever was influencing the author of The Grapes of Wrath, who's a famous author who was argued was a socialist at the time in the halls of Congress.
John Steinbeck?
Yes, John Steinbeck. The line that his character gives, this daughter who just lost the girl, who's talking to her mother, says, they are not the real people, Mama. We're the real people. In other words, the salt of the earth, those who are suffering and being moved from one state to another, sort of economic and political refugees, trying to make it in the world. Well, that's an example of establishing an insider group. And the outsider group, by his use of the phrase in the words of his character of this daughter who just had a miscarriage, that's the use of the insider-outsider problem, because in the insider-outsider problem, what you're saying is that all of humanity is just our group, our identity, as what draws us together and gives us a commonality, and everyone else not within that group is not an actual human being. In other words, with inalienable rights. And that's where you get the idea of things like eat the rich, because you're no longer seeing the humanity of those outside of your identity group. So I like taking it from that small position, because you could also claim that there are people who live in a form of socialism, who basically have the privileges, who have money coming in from poor states going automatically into their coffers, keeping them perpetually rich, and then these can become like a pharaoh class, thinking because they have all this wealth and money, well, that must be divinely inspired, and they are the only human beings, and everyone else, though they may be in human form, don't actually have a human soul, so therefore we can treat them like beasts of burden. And that's another example of the insider-outsider problem. So the position that I, and probably a number of other people, perhaps yourself too, I think anyone who's possible or is capable of holding this, is that all of humanity, we're all created in God's image, and we all have these inalienable rights, or these, and then the reason why you don't kill an image of God is because it's an affront to God, and it's recognized, and not only in the 10 Commandments as a commandment, thou shalt not murder, but it's recognized in all sorts of other belief systems. These are agreed upon standards that are violated on a regular basis by states which operate to maintain privilege. So you have folks like Major General Smedley Butler from the United States Marine Corps, who wrote a book called War is a Racket, and he had suspected while he was in it. But then when he retired from it, he could see it even more clearly, that when he was being sent to go in and establish these banana republics, literally he was operating on these private interests, operating out of privilege, and the state was being utilized to maintain that privilege.
Wow. That was wonderful.
I've got to go.
Oh, shoot. I don't know if you concluded the conference that you were at. Was there a goal in mind as far as how to live for today from this group, or that?
Right. So what I got, because I got into a discussion of probably the greatest author today, or at least most prolific, because it's a contest, I would say, between. And I don't, they're good. I'd say they're probably friends, because he had a stand with about 30 different books. An English author who started off as a British nationalist, and then he had a conversion experience and completely, like God often does, completely changed his world, because he was started off as a British nationalist who thought that it was for Britain, and anyone who wasn't British had to get out, and it's like a lot of British, very angry in that regard. God changed him, and he wound up writing all these books. He was heavily influenced by Chesterton, but also E.F. Schumacher, the author of Small is Beautiful. He wrote a book called Small is Still Beautiful. And